Hello and welcome to the ROKER Report podcast in association with Vaux Brewery. My name is Anthony Waterson and unfortunately we don't have much football or recent football to talk to you about, but we do have an interview today and we have got Nick Barnes from BBC Radio Newcastle. Nick, lovely to see you again. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm good. I'm carrying no symptoms of coronavirus.
So we have got Anthony Gay here
Sorry,
as well.
yes, I'm still here, yeah.
It's all right. How are you, mate?
I'm fine, yeah. Just not poorly, so that's a good start, isn't it?
Are you well stocked up on your toilet roll and pasta?
I bought 9 this morning, 9 toilet rolls. I don't like pasta, so that's why I've got a gut.
It sounds like a really weird DT project we did at school, wasn't it? You know, toilet roll, pasta.
Yeah,
Why are
get
people just
a
buying that?
notice board and stick things to it. Yeah, it sounds actually that's the next activity for me children, I suppose.
So what we'll do is we'll not be political. We'll talk about football, I reckon, because we can talk about football for ages. So, Nick, like we say, welcome to the wonderful studio that we're in here that Johnny Robb has kindly put on for us. Do you like it?
I do, actually. I mean, the fact that firstly we're on a sofa, which is a big start, a big plus to start with, and it's all very comfortable. It's like sitting in someone's front room.
Obviously, we don't have webcam, but it is a beautiful room full of lovely pictures, wonderful lighting. It's just fantastic. So, Nick, we're really going to talk about you for an hour and a half or whenever we kind of run out of things to talk about, really. So, obviously, you are the voice of Sunderland AFC on the radio, wherever you get your radio from all around the world to listen to Sunderland. They'll probably hear you and Gary Bennett trying to scream all over your commentary. So, you've been doing that since 2003 for Sunderland, isn't it?
2003 when we started. Yeah, our first game together was a friendly at Kilmarnock, and that was meant to be the tester to see if Benno was, suitable as a summariser. So something went wrong, and he's been with
tester was, he's been sacked since.
And he's been with me ever since. So yeah, 2003-04 when Mick McCarthy, when they obviously just gone down. And that was the start of our, 17 years?
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously, we'd gone down at the 19-point season, and that was the real kind of first sort of transformation for Sunderland, really, because we had the likes of Kevin Phillips, Claudio Reyna, Stefan Sforza who'd all left, replaced him with probably like Liam Lawrence, Stephen Elliott and things like that, wasn't it? So it must have been like a real change, obviously, from you when you obviously knew who Sunderland were before you came to us, and then having to commentate on us trying again, and it was really a bit of a... We got the playoff final, didn't we? Playoff semi-final that season. Got beat off Crystal Palace.
Well, it was that famous Jeff Whitley penalty.
Yes, that was it. Yeah, the pass back.
Yeah.
The Neil Shipley foul.
Which, to his credit, he's happy to talk about these days. In fact, Jeff is now doing a lot of stuff in the media, isn't he? Because of his past experiences with drugs and alcohol and
with Sean Thornton
and Sean Thornton. There's another past problem. So yeah, I mean that was a strange time, as you said. I mean, I did know a bit. Obviously, knew about Sunderland because I was at the time covering Newcastle, and that I did have to cover a handful of Sunderland games actually at one point because of sickness or whatever. So one of them was the game at West Ham when Sunderland could have gone top of the Premier League, but for that late equaliser.
Oh, that was on the match of the day on the night when we were literally joined top of the league, weren't we? And all the summariser was talking about was Joe Cole.
Yeah. I remember that game. Doing that game, I did I think I did a 5-0 against Derby at the Stadium of Light or at Pride Park. I mean, I did a handful of games, and I had to come down every so often to Keane to interview Peter Reid and the players, and so I had a sort of foot in Sunderland, but it was a small handprint at the time.
That would have been round about the end of the Reid era. Was he all right with you and stuff?
He was fine.
He was known to be a little bit of a loud.
He was fine. I didn't have any problems with Peter. Funnily enough, Bobby Saxton. There's a sort of strange history with me and Bobby Saxton because I'm an Exeter fan. That's where I grew up. And Bobby Saxton was the player manager at Exeter when I first started watching Exeter City. And Bobby took Exeter out of the then 4th division into the 3rd division. So Bobby was always a hero for me. And then when Roy Keane had arrived at the club, and early on when Bobby was still there, we had a charity match we played behind closed doors at the Academy of Light. And Bobby and I remember we were walking out from the dressing rooms to the pitch, and we were just reminiscing about his Exeter team of 1976 and going through the whole team and all the players. And I mean, Bobby's great. He's absolutely fantastic. And bizarrely, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but Anthony Rutherford, who was at Radio Newcastle as our Strictly Come Dancing correspondent, because Anthony is a dancer and he used to be on Strictly Come Dancing, Bobby's his uncle. And so Anthony appears at Radio Newcastle and he starts chatting about Bobby Saxton. I said, well, how do you know Bobby? Oh, he's my uncle. But no, Bobby's fantastic. If you talk to anybody involved in football, he was in a way, he was the real sort of brains behind the Peter Reid, Bobby Saxton combo. He was the coach. He was the one that really pulled the strings, if you like. And Peter was the sort of front man. You know, he was the front of stage. He was the guy that everyone saw as the manager and the frontispiece and the spoke. But Bobby was the one that really was the players loved him. Very, very
swore
good
a
coach.
lot as well. Which
He
was,
did swear a lot, but he was a product of his age, wasn't he? I mean, and in fairness to Bobby, I mean, when he was a manager at Exeter, he left there, went to Plymouth and Blackburn. His record at both Blackburn and Plymouth is fantastic. I mean, he was very, very unlucky not to get either of them promoted to the then Division 1.
It was probably a good thing that he did well at Exeter, in case you were on the pitch and you were shouting Saxton out. If you did a really bad job, you might have been given a decent tackle off him, because he was quite a brute back in his day, wasn't
he had the look of Steve Bruce about his face, isn't he? You know, he was but back in the day, though. I mean, back in the 70s, I remember watching football in 4th Division, and Exeter had a player called Johnny Hoare, who actually went on to manage Plymouth, but he used to wear rugby boots. Literally wore the high ankle rugby boots to play football, and the other players had quirks like that. It's unheard of now when you look at those slim sort of thin leather boots that players wear, and obviously the ball has changed weight and so on, but back in the day it was that was real football.
I reckon Lee Catmull probably wore rugby boots once or twice.
Lee would have worn that. Lee would have been Johnny Hoare. Absolutely, yeah.
He was the only one in the games last season or season, but in fact, whenever he's played for Sunderland, who ever had black boots on, never changed it. They were just black, with a little sort of Nike tick or something like that, and fair play to him. So what you said there before, you started off with Newcastle.
Well, I started off with Carlisle. Funnily enough, I started off with Carlisle, and long story, but I was basically about to get banned at Carlisle, and and managed to.
Sounds ominous.
Yeah, well, it was Michael Knighton. People remember Michael Knighton. So I knew that the end of the 97-98 season, I was thinking, right, next season I'm not going to be doing Carlisle United, and I got a move to London for 4 months with Ian Dennis, who's now the football correspondent for 5 Live. So we were working for BBC Sport in London, and he was then the Newcastle United commentator. But he knew he was going to Leeds United in the September when our attachment in London finished. So he said, "Well, look, that Newcastle job is there. It's yours, really. If you want it, it's basically yours to have." And knowing that I wasn't going back to Carlisle, I took the Newcastle job.
It's a bit of a step up, isn't it?
Well, yes,
no offense to Carlisle.
Yeah, no, yes and
disagree.
no. I mean, it was interesting because at that time, Ruud Gullit had just been appointed. I mean, literally, I started the week Ruud Gullit
loved Ruud Gullit. What a manager he was for Newcastle.
He was a
Brilliant
nightmare. And so I had a year of Ruud Gullit, and then 4 years of Bobby Robson. So the time that I was there, I couldn't have asked for more. It was European football, top of the Premier League, Bobby Robson. So it was an experience. I mean, it was fantastic.
You do realise all mention of Newcastle will be censored.
All going to be edited out, so any reference back will make no sense whatsoever.
I will say Bobby Robson is a legend, though. A Sunderland family from Saxton.
Well, we could spend an hour and a half talking about Bobby Robson. Believe me, it wasn't all plain sailing with Bobby.
Outstanding character, though.
He was the character. I mean, there's not telling any secrets here. He was a grumpy old git.
Oh yeah.
And there were two sides to him in a way. There was the side you didn't see on camera or hear on the radio, and then there's the side you heard on the radio and saw on the television cameras when he would just, as soon as the microphone was switched on, he was a different person altogether, and you couldn't stop him talking. I mean, he was off mic as well. He was a character. I mean, he was great value off the record, but who's
the best manager you've probably worked alongside in the media?
Well, funnily enough, Roy Keane is up. Roy Keane and Steve Bruce. Now I know Steve will probably polarise opinion, but to work with Steve was fantastic. I mean, he was again, you see, because he was old school manager. You could phone him anytime. He was brilliant with me. He'd always give me the team on Saturday morning. We'd see him at the game. We'd have 20 minutes chat before the game, and he'd tell you what's going on. He was very, very open. Just a genuine guy. You know, he was
I
very
think that comes across in
very
all of
much
his
the old
interviews.
school.
To be honest,
Yeah,
I suppose that's why he's denigrated a lot in media, because a lot of people just think he's a normal guy. He's not really one of these elite football managers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think perhaps that coming across like that makes him appear too, I don't know, how would you say, domestic in the sense that it's like someone who's not really qualified to do the job. But actually, he was very, very thorough, and you know, underneath that sort of bumbling, blustering sort of exterior, there was a very thorough and professional manager.
I think that might explain the sort of the burnout that the teams would have towards Christmas time, isn't it? I mean, it's because he's worked so hard, he might have just died off a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I've had this discussion with a couple of people about how you always had that, you know, initial sort of bounce from Steve Bruce, and maybe for 18 months you've got really good results, and then he always seems to hit the wall. Now, it may be that. I don't know. I mean, I've never really put my finger on why it's happened, and it seems to have happened.
It is a significant pattern that happens in all of his engagements.
Yeah, it has, and I think it's pretty much happened every club he's been at. Now, you know, when Sheffield Wednesday, I was speaking to someone from Sheffield earlier this year, and there seemed to be an impression that Sheffield Wednesday fans didn't like Steve Bruce and he left them in the lurch. But actually, when you talk to Wednesday fans, they loved him, and the players loved him, and they said he was really achieving things for Sheffield Wednesday. So had he stayed there, I suspect Sheffield Wednesday will be doing markedly better than they are now under Gary Monk. So I think, you know, Steve's had a bad press, but
definitely.
Going back to what you were saying before about working with him, brilliant. And Roy Keane was just gold dust. I mean, just utterly professional. Again, you know, when the microphone was off, sometimes he could be very, very funny, dry sense of humour, and he loved this sort of. I think he sort of really revelled in the image people had of him.
Yeah,
that he was this fearsome, brutal. You know, you don't cross the line with Roy Keane.
That comes across,
and it's I mean, away games were always the special, because if you went to a press conference after an away game, you saw him playing this game with the local press who didn't know him, of basically going into the press room, sitting there in silence, waiting for the first question. Someone would then eventually be brave enough to ask it, and he would bite back. And his game was, let's see if they're brave enough to come back at me. And as often as not, they wouldn't. And so Louise, who was the press officer at the time, I mean, she's still at the club, but she's not the press officer now. She used to actually have to try and set up, say, Scott Wilson famously she set Scott Wilson up at Sheffield Wednesday after they won 4-2, to ask the first questions to get the thing going, because otherwise the whole press conference came to a halt after one question, because the local press were too terrified to ask any questions. But then at Sheffield Wednesday, when it'd been the game where Sunderland were comfortably winning, I think 3-0, 3-2 or whatever, but they conceded 2 late goals.
Yeah, it was 4-2.
And then it ended 4-2.
Yeah.
Anyway, Roy was furious. I mean, he was absolutely furious. The dressing room was apparently, you know, you just didn't dare go in. So he eventually came out to do the press conference. Scott had to ask the first question, and it was a bit stuttered, and a few people, and then it ended. But as Roy was leaving, Scott stood up and said, "Oh, by the way, before you go, I forgot to ask any injuries." And Roy just stared at him and went, "Not yet."
I remember that game. I was actually at that game. That was the debut of the na-na-na-na.
Yes.
Keane. It was at half time, so we were winning 3-0 at half time, and that song came on. It was crazy.
But he was brilliant to deal with. He was a stickler for punctuality. He always had his press conference at 8:45 on generally a Friday morning. So it was always 8:45. He'd always be on time. If 30 seconds late, he expected everybody else to be on time. And when he first arrived, he did say to us, "Look, if you show me respect, I'll show you respect." I thought that's fine, and you're more than happy to work within those restraints. Yeah. But he was great. I mean, he was genuinely he was very good to interview. You had to be on, you know, what I liked in a way was you had to be on your mettle with him. You couldn't go down there and sort of try and sort of guess your way through a press conference or an interview with not knowing what your stuff, because he would pull you up on things. And he would. I remember after the Derby defeat at St James's Park, the 2-1, and there was a lot that week following the defeat. A lot of fans still angry about his tactics, and so I think it's beholden upon me on the Friday morning following to say to him, "Look, first question was, you know, there's still a lot of anger about the tactics you employed last weekend. And the first thing he said to me, just stared at me. He said, "Well, what were they?" I thought, if I get this wrong, I'm for the high jump. And I sort of bumbled my way through, and he went, "Yeah," and then he was fine.
Did you notice with him, with Roy, because obviously he started off, got us promoted, fantastic, got us survived in the Premier League, and we were playing some good football under him, and then in that second season in the Premier League, it just seemed to just go, and he seemed to just go as well.
I think I often thought about this, and there were a couple of things. I think the first thing was his recruitment. That summer was poor.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
he made the wrong decisions in bringing in Hadj Diouf, Chimbonda, and whoever it might have been. It was the wrong people to bring into that dressing room.
But what I'd do for them now.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, but that particular summer's recruitment was poor. He made mistakes in who he brought in, and I think the other side of the Keane management situation was his number 2 was too weak. I mean, Tony Loughlin, no doubt is a good coach and good bloke. And is he still at Burnley now?
I think so. I think he is. Yeah.
But he was the wrong person to have alongside.
There were a lot
Keane.
of rumoured people before. Tony
Brian
Loughlin
Kidd was lined up,
Steve McClaren
and Brian would have been fine. Brian would have been ideal.
Yeah.
Brian would have been absolutely ideal because he's experienced, the older head. And I think would have stood up to Roy about things and would have been able to say, "Look, no, don't do this."
He famously stood up to Alex Ferguson, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think that's what Roy Keane needed. I think in Tony he had too much of a yes man, too much of a friend, too much of a, and Roy explains the reasons for Tony's appointment. It's someone he trusted at Nottingham Forest. It's someone he trusted as a friend, and I think that was ultimately the wrong reasons to have a number 2. I mean, if you want a number 2, you could have someone who's there to do a specific job, and sometimes that is to. And I think that was the Martin O'Neill thing at Sunderland. Didn't work because John Robertson didn't come with him.
Yeah. Well, that was the main point.
And I think I think there's a lot in that. I mean, Steve Bruce at Sunderland, Eric Black again, who was a very, very good coach and was the right dynamic, I think, for the pairing. But Roy, then it did unravel, and I think he started to go wrong with him and Ellis Short.
Yeah.
And we knew. I mean, the first sign of it was Sunderland had a League Cup tie against Northampton.
I was just about to say that.
Roy forgot the press conference.
Yeah.
He just forgot to turn up.
Did he?
And which was extraordinary. I mean, so it was. He flew in the next day from Cheshire and held a press conference, but had started to grow a beard. And we've always said ever since, as soon as Roy starts growing a beard, something's not right. I had a long conversation at Old Trafford with Graham Taylor, bless him, all about half an hour conversation. Would you believe it? Half an hour conversation about Roy Keane's beard with Graham Taylor. I mean, but it was true. We all felt that at that period, then there was a period of sort of 6 weeks when it was starting to. You could sense it was unravelling.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it did.
And then when we played Bolton, we got beat off Bolton
4-0.
And he brought 3 defensive midfielders on, didn't he?
It was just lots of little things, and it clearly wasn't working. And I think he knew he sent in much the same way that Gus Poyet knew the end was nigh.
Yeah.
And Gus pressed all the wrong buttons basically because he was desperately trying to get sacked. In my mind, I mean, I think the whole. It was interesting because when Gus Poyet, that 4-0 defeat at home to Villa, when he just sat on the bench and didn't make any changes, and then now Seb Larsson to run on 2 minutes late into the second half. I saw Ellis Short at West Ham a week or so later, and he came across to Benno and I and said, I was determined not to sack him because I think he knew that Gus was trying to play that game, but he said that Seb Larsson incident was the final straw.
I'd left at half time, so I can't remember that at all.
So I couldn't not sack him after that. Because I remember when Paolo Di Canio was, slightly mad.
I'd take him back now.
But someone spoke to me, a friend of mine in the game spoke to me about Gus because they worked with him. Said, that Gus is going to show the same tendencies. There's a Latin sort of temperament.
Well, they were both together at Swindon, weren't they?
And he said he won't be as manic as Paolo was, but there will be that. There's that Latin in him, and sure enough, Gus, that did start to.
Do you remember when he started kicking the balls on the pitch when we played Leeds, when he was Dennis Wise's number 2? We beat Leeds when I think it was under Roy Keane, and we'd knocked one of the fans. The ball had gone out. One of the fans had threw the ball back on the pitch. They were trying to take a quick throw in, and then so the referee obviously stopped the game. Gus was kicking the balls all on the pitch. He did about 3 or 4 balls. He got sent off.
Well, he was. I like Gus. Got on really well with him, and I mean, Charlie Oatway, where do you go with there? I mean, what an extraordinary combination those two were, but it worked. I mean, that again.
I met Charlie Oatway in the Grey Horse in Penshire once.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, nobody was in a fit state.
Charlie was Charlie. I mean, extraordinary character.
So we've spoke about the best managers. We're going to have to mention the worst. Have you got anyone you kind of were like, no?
Well, I mean, the two managers. Well, one, Ruud Gullit was one I just didn't warm to, and he didn't like the press, and it certainly wasn't ever going to end well.
He done brilliantly with Shearer, though.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary that a whole thing with that Alan Shearer Ruud Gullit thing, and then to see them, years later together on the couch.
Yeah, that's
on Match of the Day.
Isn't it? Yeah,
but it's a little bit like the Roy Keane, Mick McCarthy, all the handshakes at Wolves and everything else. I mean, those two hate each other.
Yeah.
There's never going to be any. And this, and now Mick will happily tell you, that was just a show. It was a sham. But I still can't understand that Ruud Gullit, Alan Shearer, because Shearer clearly hated him. There was just no love lost there, and you could tell by Shearer's demeanour in interviews and stuff that he was just not. He was not going to give Gullit anything in terms of playing because he just didn't get on.
When was that?
2001, yeah. And
it was brilliant.
So it was a really weird period, and so Ruud Gullit was not someone I warmed to at all. The other is David Moyes. Now, the strange thing about David Moyes was when we weren't on the record, he was a really nice guy. But as soon as you switched the microphone on, he really was Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, it was two totally different characters. It's almost like he had a split personality.
Yeah, I always thought he didn't want to be here for the year he was.
Weird.
I just didn't think he wanted the job. It was just something to get him back into football. And then when, obviously, it was going wrong from the second game of the season, according to him, wasn't it?
Relegation.
I didn't feel like he wanted to be at Sunderland, which was a shame.
Did he threaten to slap a woman as well at some point?
Yes, he did.
Oh, there was the whole Vicky Sparks. I mean, in fact, I was there and literally in the room when that happened, and his whole David Moyes' whole denials about that afterwards. He still, even for all the apologies, and he still couldn't see what he'd done wrong.
Yeah.
I think he still felt he was the victim, which was a really strange. I mean, bless Vicky, she didn't want to take it anywhere. She didn't want to make a song and dance about it because she didn't want to become the story. I think Vicky didn't really want to put herself in the spotlight. So after it all happened on the Saturday, it didn't appear anywhere. It died a death and it had gone. It was only because the feed had been picked up by someone somewhere and they'd listened through it. Whoa, hang on a minute, and then it was, in the public
get
domain.
away with it now, can you? At all?
No, and it was wrong. I mean, it was David Moyes was demonstrating what he does to all reporters, not just female reporters. What he did with all reporters was basically try and frighten them into. It was aggressive. It was passive aggressive, if you like. He would stare at you when you were doing interviews. He'd give you short answers. He would try and psych you out, and it was not very nice. It wasn't very, it started to happen at Sunderland 3 or 4 months into his time there, because at the start he was on a real charm offensive.
Yeah.
But once the results started to go against him and things were clearly going wrong, he started to go into that default aggressive mode. And
it's clearly led to good things
yeah,
at West Ham.
And I spoke to a lot of people about him who've known him for years. I mean, I've known reporters who knew him when he was at Preston and at Everton, and it follows a pattern.
Yeah.
It definitely followed a pattern, yeah.
He's not a very nice man.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got him at West Ham right now. When the first thing he said when he joined there was, "I win things," and everybody was just like, "I beg your pardon."
He's done well. He's won twice, hasn't he? So.
Well, he's just. I mean, I say he can be thoroughly charming and a really nice guy. And the bizarre thing was when he left, we were at Chelsea, and Phil Smith and I, Phil of the Sunderland Echo, we were waiting at the back of the stand because, of course, it was the day Chelsea won the championship, so. We couldn't get out the front to do the interviews in the tunnel where we'd normally be, so we had to wait out the back by the bus, and we couldn't get the players, so we were hanging around waiting for a player, and waiting for David Moyes, but he came out eventually with Martin Bain, and Martin Bain got sort of straight on the bus, but David Moyes came over and shook both our hands and said goodbye, and I just turned to Phil when he got on the bus and said, "He's off, he's gone."
Yeah,
that's him saying I'm finished. But it was a really strange episode. And funny enough, ironically, we've been in exactly the same place out the back at Stamford Bridge when Dick Advocat left the first time. And it was a really strange episode. It was almost like a deja vu because Dick was going through the same thing at Chelsea with us, sort of almost crying, shaking our hands and saying goodbye. And, we thought that was going to be the last we saw of him. So weird, so how you have these relationships with managers and how they end sometimes. And I was quite taken aback by the David Moyes because I thought he had been like Martin Bain, straight down the steps and on the bus.
Yeah.
But I'll give him his due. He was, to come across and
He just treated as a
and
job.
say goodbye. Yeah,
He treated as part of his work,
yeah,
really, didn't he?
was
And then when he was
interesting.
outside of that, he was a different person.
I mean, you've seen your comes and goings from managers. Has there been any of them you've felt sorry for who actually got the sack? Like recent one, maybe like Jack Ross this season, who wasn't really doing badly.
No,
Wasn't doing well, but we haven't improved, have we? So,
well, Simon Grayson's another one. I felt sorry.
I think we
for.
mentioned that the first
in
when we were on
the manner in which it ended that night at Bolton was brutal in a way. I mean, you're drawn 3-3. You're actually not in an awful position, and I know things weren't right. Things clearly weren't going well. I think that game at Ipswich, I said that night, I felt that was a team that was going to be relegated because it was you had this intuition that it was in bits. Something was gone horribly wrong, and was going horribly wrong. So in a way, I mean, and when we were at Preston, Benno and I were on 5 Live, and Mark Chapman was on with Ian Dennis, and Mark said to me in the interview, "Do you think Simon Grayson's under pressure?" And I said, "Well, I think I do, yes, because I think things aren't going right. Things are going wrong here." And Ian Dennis, who knows Simon Grayson very well, chipped in and said, "No, I can assure you that Simon's not under pressure." And I thought that day, no, I think, look, not wishing to blow my own trumpet, I'm on the inside here because I see Simon every week. We see the games. Something's not right.
Yeah, you could see it on the documentary.
Yeah, and I think with hindsight, yes, the decision was probably right. I just think it was the manner in which it was handled wasn't good.
Yeah.
But going back to that original question about do you feel sorry for managers? Yes, you do, because you have a working relationship with them, and especially if you have got on with them. You do feel slightly. It's a shame. David Moyes and Ruud Gullit. No, I didn't, because I felt they were difficult relationships. They were difficult managers, but all the other managers, all of them, even Paolo Di Canio, I never had an issue with them and a problem with them. So you do feel, you in a way, because the nature of the job is you do get to know them pretty well. I mean, all as well as you can, because it generally sacked after 3 months. No, I mean, it was great when you have a relationship with, say, someone like Steve Bruce, who was there 2.5 years, because you did genuinely build up a relationship with them. And even Roy, the time he was there. And so you are sorry to see them go, because the other side of it being quite selfish is, you've got to start again.
Yeah.
So, you go through that period of wondering who it's going to be and will you get on with them? And then you've got to start this whole process again of getting to know the manager and getting them to trust you, getting them to, trust you enough to start telling you stuff off the record and so on. And that takes, it takes time to build those relationships up and prove to them that you're not betraying those confidences and at the same time being objective and trying to, you walk a very fine line. One of the criticisms we often get is we don't ask the tough questions, but they're not easy to ask sometimes, because you can, a manager can sometimes feel betrayed if you're suddenly sticking the knife in. And I think a prime example of that is the Phil Parkinson episode before Christmas, when everyone, with the way the results were going, quite rightly, had every right to judge what was happening on the pitch. But it was very difficult to stick the knife into the manager then, because at the back of your mind, you're thinking through what's going to happen. And there was a very fair chance he wasn't going to get sacked, because Stuart Donald, even though he had the record at Eastleigh of sacking managers, I don't think he had the money or the wherewithal or had the appetite.
I don't think he had any interest in
No,
sacking
so I thought,
footballers.
well, you've got to be very, very careful here. And sure enough, it turned. Okay, it's turned around again now, and we've got to see what happens with all this business. But so you've got to be very conscious of relationships that you're building with managers and players, and so it's not as straightforward sometimes as tell the manager he's got to do this, or tell him when's he going to get sacked or when's he going to walk. It just doesn't work like that.
On that note, is there anything you think you've ever said sort of in the media that's led to a significant decision at Sunderland?
I wouldn't be so bold as to say I've said or done anything that's led to a decision, But I think
there's something that's the sort of snowballed into something. So say you've said something and all the fans have went, oh, actually, spot on. Yeah.
possibly, I mean, I wouldn't know off the top of my head, but I think collectively in the sort of local media, we probably have, I think, because, I think, like us or loathe us, people do listen and read local media. And I think we do form opinions and judgments, and we are opinion formers and makers, I suppose. So I suppose inevitably, I think there are certain times. Here's an example, and I don't think I'm betraying any confidences because the person involved, Aidan McGeady, was quite sort of. He really wanted his side of the story told, and spoken to me about a moment he was sort of angry that everything was slanted against him.
Yeah.
And portraying him as the bad guy and making him out to be the culprit in everything that happened and being ostracized. And I thought, when I had the long conversation with him, I thought, he's got a point here, because we had all been really putting out Phil Parkinson's side of the story. And because Aidan McGeady's still under contract to the club, he couldn't talk and couldn't put his side out there. So I think, sometimes we can get sucked in a little bit by the relationships we have with the managers. And I think that McGeady instance was a good example of that. And I was able then, when Aidan had spoken to the South London press, which was my that was the gateway for me to be able to talk about it, because I say, look, he's now spoken to the press. And so I think it's only fair that we also put Aidan McGeady's side of the story out here. And there are, the two sides to the story. Now, whether that has changed people's opinion of Aidan McGeady in the last month, I don't know, but I think it's an example of how you can change opinion. And it's funny enough, today I've had a conversation with John Coleman, who works for the Cumberland News in Carlisle, about Carlisle United's 25th anniversary of going to Wembley for the first time. And at the end of the interview, he said, how do you feel that Carlisle fans still see you as a big part of that day, and Carlisle being the voice of Carlisle, and how they accept you, and what do you think of that? I said, to be honest, I'm flattered by it and quite humbled by it. But I think it comes back to the point you make, is as much as we don't think sometimes anybody's listening to us or actually hangs on every word or whatever, sometimes people do. Yeah. And I think we therefore have a responsibility incumbent on us to be responsible with what we say.
Even like now, where you've got like social media and things, where your voice is pretty much over every
and anything, the slightest word can be picked up.
Yeah.
The slightest sentence can be picked up and taken out of context and misconstrued.
Yeah.
And sometimes you make a glib throwaway comment in a commentary, and all of a sudden that can come back to the other week at Bristol Rovers, I'd said in the commentary, this is a real, this was potentially a real banana skin. Oof, that blew up into something. And I thought, well, it was a throwaway comment merely to say, for all the, Sunderland lost 2-0, really, as Benno said right at the start, don't get sucked in by Bristol Rovers being the worst team in the league at the minute. Mm-hmm. These are the games that really do come back to bite you on the bum. So it was a sort of comment that was meant to be framed within that context, but one sentence, and it can be.
I think in League One, though, every game's a banana skin for me, and we've kind of gone worse than this. We should be better than every team in League One, but we're not.
Well, it's true, but because this is one thing that Jack Ross was always trying to get across, and never really did. I think Phil Parkinson maybe has got it across better than Jack did. People forget this is a League One team. These are League One players,
and they've got
if not worse. And I think there's a lot to be said for how if you were ultra critical of the individuals in the Sunderland team at the minute, you could pick up, say, a Max Power and say, well, why did he never get beyond a certain point at Wigan? Why were Wigan so willing to let him go? And so on. So you can analyse each individual, and actually, when it comes down to it, it's one of the, can't remember which League One manager it was recently, said, look, the bottom line is this Sunderland team is no better than every other team in League One.
Yeah, I think it was Steve Evans, the Gillingham manager.
It might have been Steve Evans.
Because it was just after Joey Barton was doing the whole...
I think it was around that time. I think Joe Barton had made a comment about it, and if you're honest, it isn't. What it lacks is clearly a goal scorer. What it lacks is someone in midfield that's really managed to take the game by scruff of the neck.
Although
And it's
Maguire
always
has
been
started to do that, hasn't he?
But the flaw in Maguire is he does it for 7 games, then has this dip in form.
Yeah.
And then people say, well, why have you dropped Maguire? Well, because you have to, because it's the only way you're going to get Maguire back up to form. He's out for 3 or 4 matches, comes back, plays like Wonder Man again, and then people say, well, why did you drop him? But you have to, because it's the only way you can get any sort of consistency out of Maguire.
I kind of
why he's been playing at Bury, why he's been playing
at Oxford
and the lower leagues, because that's what these players are fundamentally flawed.
I mean, I feel for Parkinson. It seems that he's tried everything up front now. We've got that Semenyo lad.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we're straying now into the sort of Phil Parkinson territory and what's happening now. If I had one criticism, and this is just opinion, because Marco Gabbiadini and I had a sort of debate about this. I've just felt that if you look at the other managers in League One, they don't rigidly play 3-4-3 week in, week out and never change it, or 4-4-2 and never change it. They do swap it around. They do, and I think what has happened with Sunderland is managers have just they've just realised what Sunderland do and know how to negate it, because Sunderland aren't doing anything to change it, and have the managers second guessing. Now that's largely, I think, because Phil's struck on an 11 that works, a system that works. And he's almost he's too conservative and too frightened to change it in case he changes it.
That's why we lost the 3. It's because the games that we played over there.
Yeah, and I think maybe he should have been a bit more daring with the lineup. Maybe he perhaps should have brought in Semenyo, who's an out-and-out striker. Bristol City see him as an out-and-out striker, not as a wide player.
Which is where he's been playing left side.
So, yeah, and I think, it's tinkering like that, although Marco argued that, no, you can rigidly play the same formation match in, match out, because that's what they did in 1987-88, never changed it. And
that was 4-4-2, wasn't it?
And it cruised through on, that formation. So, look, it's a debate. Yeah, and you're right. And they have better players, and I think that's a flaw of this team. He's Phil Parkinson's identified the strengths and weaknesses of the team. And Denver Hume, clearly has weaknesses, big weaknesses. But I think there's a feeling from Phil that Declan John isn't proving enough on the training pitch that he's any better. Yeah. And he knows what Denver's going to give you, especially at home. But, we could debate long and hard about the wheres and wherefores of this team. The nub of it comes whenever this season ends, as to whether they are in the top 2 or even in the playoffs now.
Do you think we will get promoted? Last question on the recent team. Do you think they'll go?
A month ago, I said yes. But now, on the back of the Bristol Rovers game and them dropping out of the playoffs, I'm not so sure, because I worry that the teams above them have got better momentum than Sunderland have. And for the best will in the world, Sunderland might go on and win the final 8 games of the season, or 9 games, or whatever it is, and still miss out, because Peterborough, Oxford, Portsmouth all keep winning.
Yeah, I just don't think we've got enough home games left. I think going away, like when we went to Bristol Rovers midweek, we've gone down there and got turned over. We've done it.
Well, I worry at someone like AFC Wimbledon on the same basis as Bristol Rovers, because everyone will think, Wimbledon. But
it's
Wimbledon,
their cup final, isn't it?
And for Wimbledon, the way they play their football, it's interesting that Gillingham, on that run they've just had, the 2 games they lost that bookended that run were AFC Wimbledon.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
spoilers,
the spoilers. So, that's what they will do. And I think that's the sort of game that Sunderland will struggle to deal with, because it will be physical. And Sunderland they're not a physical team. No.
So we'll go on to, we did the all managers you got on with. Was there ever a player that when you got sent to the academy, like, can't wait to interview him?
Oh, Bolo Zenden, yeah. Bolo, I loved, bizarrely, Fabio Barini as well, but just because he was a clown. In the nicest sense of the word. Fabio was just such a funny guy, because stories like his, I heard that I said it to him, is it true your mother sends you food parcels? And he's, he said, because the food here is, okay, fair enough.
You could do one of them now off Fabio's mum, if you're listening.
Yeah, you could do.
If you've got toilet roll.
So he was great to do, because you could wind him up in that sense. Bolo was just really bright, a really nice guy to interview, very, very intelligent, and I just really enjoyed. One of the funniest actually was Nicholas Bentner, of all people, because Nicholas actually was quite a nice guy. I mean, clearly he's he lives in another world when it comes to social nuances and how he conducts himself. But
I really liked him at Sunderland. I must say.
and he there was an interview one day, and I was talking to him, and I sort of said to him, you know, Nicholas, you are, for want of a better word. I'd had one of those moments, you know, sort of brain freeze, and I couldn't think of the word I was looking for. So I said, you are, for want of a better word, and there's a moment's silence. I said, arrogant. And he just stared at me, and I could see James Hunter and Graham Anderson, the others, going, and Nicholas went, yeah. Well, you have to be as a striker. That's the way, you know. There's no point in being. And he was great to interview. He was a really good talker. And Nicholas Bentner, Bolo Zenden.
You didn't teach him that dance, did you?
No, but he was. You always went down, and there were certain players when you went down to the academy to interview. You know, some weeks you breathe a sigh of relief. Others you go, you know. But there were others. There were the dependables, like, you know, you always had the player that was wheeled out after a defeat.
Yeah.
And
Max Power now, isn't it?
well, Max said the other week, he says, you only talk to me when we lose. And funny enough, the other player that's been wheeled out now on a regular basis, and we're joking with him about it, is Jordan Willis. But again, Jordan's a lovely guy, and I think he's got easy to interview because I think he's a bit more relaxed with us now. But yeah, the player that in the Premier League years who got wheeled out consistently when things went horribly wrong was Phil Bardsley, and all credit to Phil for coming out and talking, because he would always do it. And I do commend players in that situation, because the last thing any player wants to do after defeat is talk. Yeah. Grant Ledbetter was another. Grant would come out and be really honest, and not. And Seb Larson would come out and be brutally honest about. He wouldn't try and, you know.
You point out as to why they always did this. Like you said, I can always remember when we were really poor in the last couple of years of our Premier League era, and it was always Bardsley, bless him, and I always felt sorry for him. And it's like, why?
I think part of it is because whoever the press officer is knows that they are dependable and they'll do it. And you could have gone to one of the other players and they would just not do it. And I think it's interesting because recently I think I spoke to Chris Maguire once, but I think it's because, you know, they're scared of him. They're scared to ask him, and because he'll just knock them back and say, no, I'm not doing that. And
I mean, it would be different if they give it to a player like,
you know, that's different characters for different occasions.
Yeah, if they dished out to someone like Tom Flanagan, who's susceptible to a bit of criticism.
Yeah, but Tom's good actually. When Tom comes out and talks, he's very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, he got some horrible criticism on the old social medias.
And Lincoln, especially, I think he got someone had a go at him at the ground.
That was horrific, wasn't it? I mean, there's ways and means to behave, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think I think you have to give credit to some of those players that when they come out and they are honest, that you know they should be given more praise, because they often get criticised, and when things are going wrong, there's a tendency sometimes for some fans to say, well, I don't want to hear what the players got to say for themselves. They're just, you know, going to come out with it.
And then the current climate, it's only football, isn't it?
Yeah, some of them don't. Some of them do speak very honestly. I mean, I'll give Aidan McGeady credit where credit's due for that as well. He was last season, he was very honest about things when he won the Player of the Year. And you know, he's a player that won't hide behind, you know, sort of cliches and towing the party line. Yeah. And there are players like that, and when you do get to speak to them, you know, it's not often, but you do appreciate that, you know, that they are the players that are good, and they're not all sort of out the same.
So do you have like a favourite player from sort of your era that have been here?
Bolo would be up there. I mean, I got on really well with Bolo, and seen him since when he was at Chelsea.
He was an outstanding footballer.
Yeah, he was brilliant. He was a brilliant. I mean, he spoke about 4 or 5 languages. I think he did all his own contract negotiations because he's got a law degree, or he certainly, if he's not got a law degree, he's well versed in the law. And you know, after he'd left, when Chelsea came up and when we were down at Stamford Bridge, he made a point of coming over and having a conversation. And
there's some gentlemen in the game.
Yeah, there are. I mean, you know, Phil Bardsley would always come across to say hello, and so you appreciate those, because you felt at the time you were probably, you know, not on their radar, because you'd maybe see them once in a blue moon, you know, after a game walking past you in the tunnel, or you'd interview them every 6 weeks or whatever. So you know, it's quite nice when you see players after they've left the club and you bump into them again, how sort of warm they are sometimes and remember things that you never even think they'd remember and chat about. But I think that's the defence mechanism in players when they're at the football club. To try and be sort of self-protecting, if you like.
But in football, in terms, was there ever a player that we had where you thought, I can't wait to see him again next week? You know, there's literally like.
Well, there was a period when, I mean, it was when Steve Bruce were there, when you had Danny Welbeck and
amazing, wasn't it?
that team, Darren Bent, Welbeck, Bentner, Kieran Richardson, and so on. And it was a really good team, and there were a lot of individuals in that. And I always got on well with Anton Ferdinand, of all people, funnily enough. Who was good to talk to, and you did actually go through a spell really enjoying watching the football, and they were winning games, and they were, there was a buzz about the place.
It was just exciting, wasn't it? I mean,
it was, and
even the Fulham game where Kieran Richardson done anything but score when they both post the ball.
The ridiculous, that's right. I mean, the ridiculous thing with Kieran Richardson was after he scored that free kick against Newcastle, he tried to do it with every single free kick forever after.
I mean,
and you
to be
thought,
fair, it's fair enough.
Just stop. It's just not happening for you. You're just not going to do it again. It was like Daryl Murphy scored that wonder goal against Wigan, and every game after that he tried it again, and it was
I can't talk about that game. I broke my leg 2 days beforehand playing football, and I missed it.
That was a goal. I mean,
Speaking of like sort of goals, have you got your favourite goal? I'm going to guess Defoe against Newcastle.
There's a few. There were a few. I mean, there was Defoe's against Newcastle. There was Carlos Edwards. 2. The one at Southampton. Which was then bettered by the one against Burnley just a couple of weeks later. But both those goals were unbelievable strikes. Bolo's ending against Tottenham.
The sort of sidekick.
That was incredible.
We did a poll over Christmas about the greatest goal scored, Stephen Light, and I did pick that one. I love that goal.
That was sublime. I mean,
genuine it was.
The word sublime's overused sometimes. But it really was sublime.
A thing of beauty, was it? Technical
fantastic. Beauty. So I think those sort of handful of goals. David Vaughan's goal at Newcastle.
Yes.
So always remember that.
And I think,
and one near miss, which actually, had it gone in, would have been a wonder strike. Stephen Elliott's when it hit the bar at St James, 3-2.
Yeah.
And had that gone in, it would have been a different result, I think. Well, I don't think they'd have lost the game.
I thought you were going to say Kevin Ball's sliding tackle.
Well, that was, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, even now, when Kevin tells that story, and we've heard it 1,000 times, it's still funny.
Yes.
He still tells it well, and that wasn't extra. I mean, but there've been a couple of moments like that over the years, and you think, my God, it's just extraordinary how these things didn't go in. And I mean that comes back to even things like Craig Gordon's save in that Bolton game. That was unbelievable. I mean, I think now you can watch it, and you can't really see why it was so fantastic. It's a great save. But at the time, in real time, that save is probably one. It's up there with Jimmy's in the cup final. It's up there with the World Cup save, in Brazil.
Remember Mark Pooms against Millwall? That was quite similar, and that was really downgraded. It was an absolutely tremendous save, and it tipped down onto the bar.
These get lost, I think, sometimes, but they were moments really worthy of. Wow, that is.
I remember when we signed Craig Gordon, I thought, this is it. We've made it now. This is us.
Yeah. Damn Jermaine Defoe.
15 years later.
Yeah, strange character, Craig. I mean, he was very quiet. He was a very thoughtful keeper. Kept himself very much to himself. And I think clearly when he went back to Scotland and he had the injury problems and everything else, and he dropped out of the game.
All Jermaine Defoe's fault, just to remind everybody.
And then came back into the game now and is playing at the top level again. But clearly he was a class keeper. But it's just something about goalkeepers, isn't it? And they do.
I remember meeting Tommy Myra and Mart Poom.
Mark was a lovely guy.
Used to work at the academy. Mart Poom would do anything for anybody.
He was a really nice guy. He was again really down to earth and.
But I mean,
genuinely honest.
The two of them
the Mart Poom goal, at Derby.
Beautiful.
So you couldn't make it up sometimes.
But there's loads of times where the two of them would just be walking around dishing out things to people. They pairs of gloves with their names on and stuff.
They were a different class of.
But they were both a bit mental as well.
But I think it's strange because I think the conversation we've often had at the academy over the years is the foreign players, as often as not, are the ones that you really warm to because they they have I think a different perception of the press, but they also have 9 times out of 10 they used to speak very, very good English, and
most of them are very eccentric as well.
And slightly, there was like Barini, there was a slight sort of madness about them, but they were actually very good to interview. Because I think they on the continent, it's probably seen as very much a part of the job, and it's something that you do, and you don't have any complaints about it because that's just part and parcel. Whereas I think in this country, players grow up thinking it's a chore and they don't want to do it, and whereas the foreign players don't seem to see it that like that.
Yeah, well, the foreign players look at the Premier League and think that's what I want to do, that's what I want to be.
Yeah.
And they build up and they get the Premier League and think, I'm going to do all of this media stuff because that's what I've seen Eric Cantona do, and that's what I've seen all of these do.
They were great. I mean, John Mensah was a case in point. What a lovely, lovely guy, and he got on really well with us in the sort of local media. And James Hunter from the Chronicle admired his pair of slippers one day. He came in these sort of slippers, and he'd brought them back from Ghana with him. And anyway, when John Mensah came back from Ghana one time, he bought James a pair of slippers back. And that's the sort of thing that you don't tend to hear about that.
Yeah.
And I remember I had to go and do Asamoah Gyan had to do an interview for the World Service, but I had to go and set it all up and basically put the microphone in front of him at his place in Darras Hall, and couldn't be more welcoming. Come in, and I'd heard this rumor that he had a fridge full of Guinness, and it was true. And so you think, how perverse is this? But his brother was there and a couple of mates, and it was really down to earth, and you just see another.
Yeah, because everyone thought that Asamoah Gyan was this absolutely eccentric, crazy sort of king.
He was a nice guy, and you do see the other side of them. Sometimes you see the other side of those. Look, don't get me wrong. In the Premier League, they do lead charmed lives, for want of a better phrase. But and inevitably they do, because they earn a massive amount of money. Yeah. They live in big houses and they drive big cars. So we're the best one in the world. These are they're separate lives. That our paths cross in a football stadium, in a tunnel, or in a the train.
Not in the Metro Centre.
And not in the Metro. Well, I did bump into John McLaughlin in Marks and Spencer recently. But then we're down at League One level now, so that's where League One players, shop.
Nothing wrong with Marks and Spencer's.
Not quick save now, isn't it?
So you were never going to bump into Jermaine Defoe's and Asamoah Gyan's in M&S.
I bumped into Joachim Björklund in Safeway in Team Valley once. Yes, that's my claim to fame.
I think the
anyway.
nearest I might have got Barini in Waitrose or something, but
I've never met. I barely meet them. I never know it's them. Until you walk past.
Well, I think the players do. I think one thing about the players in the Premier League, a lot of them did live in Newcastle because they could retain some anonymity there.
Yeah.
And so they would go out, and Steve Malbrunk ran away from me in Phoenix once, and because Steve was terrified of interviews. He obviously hated doing interviews, and I think he saw me there and thought, "My God, there must be a plant. Is he trying to interview me here now?" And I saw this frightened look on Steve's face, and he scurried away. But when I say you don't see the players in shops, you do, but it tends to be away from where they think they're going to be recognised, so they retain some sort of anonymity.
Nostalgia's a killer, isn't it?
Vito Minone, there was another lovely guy. Talking about players I used to love interviewing. Vito was fantastic. Really, really nice guy. Again, he lived in Newcastle and Jesmond, I think, and he lived there because him and his wife could retain that anonymity and do normal things
as well, isn't it?
Because Vito was normal. Vito was a normal guy in many ways. But
on the other side, we had Jibril Cisse trying to make himself as famous as possible.
Strange, yeah.
Well, the Lord of the Manor, isn't he? He's a lord, isn't he?
But Vito, there's a funny story with Vito. I may remember when the League Cup semi-final at Old Trafford. After that semi-final, Vito was dragged out by the drugs agency to do the drugs test, but he doesn't drink. And he couldn't go. So they thought the only way they're going to get Vito to go to the loo in the time, to hopefully get back to Sunderland by tomorrow morning, is if we give him a couple of drinks. And he was absolutely hammered. Absolutely hammered. And he was meant to be doing the post-match interview, but he was too drunk. And it just completely went to his head.
Bless him.
Yeah.
So
Legend.
What we'll go on to now is obviously the two things I would say what you're known for about commentary is the tweed beautiful, by the way, wearing an absolutely superb jacket. And you've also brought one of the matchbooks, which, to be fair, me and Ant have had a look at before. It is as nice in person as what it looks like on the social medias and everything like that. It's so neat, it's so eloquent. First of all, the tweed, has that always been your kind of thing? It's just been since you were young?
Probably. No, I always wore nice jackets to work, and I actually then thought I bought a couple of Harris Tweed jackets and just loved them. I just thought, I mean, what I love about Harris Tweed is it's pure. I like a whiskey. I like a Harris Tweed. Because I like the integrity of the product, if you like. Whiskey, it's water, it's malt, and it's basically still made through the processes which are several hundred years old, and it's fairly pure in essence. Tweed is the same. It's Harris Tweed is still made on the islands by the islanders on looms, and you couldn't, in one sense, get a product with more integrity than a Harris Tweed jacket. So I love if you like, the integrity of wearing it, but I actually like it because it's smart. It looks fairly smart, casual, if you like. Problem is, of course, over the years now, if I go anywhere and I'm not wearing a tweed jacket and someone recognises me, I get hammered.
I can remember
because they always assume that I'm
where's the
wearing
tweed?
tweed.
Can you remember the Portsmouth pod, which we three did together alongside with Josh, and you came in a denim, and I was so good.
So yeah, it's become I'm conscious of the fact that people, I think, expect to see me in tweed, and fine, I don't mind because I like wearing it. And just the odd occasion, if it is going to be really cold weather or wet, then I love to try and be practical and sensible. And so, but even then, I'll often wear the tweed jacket underneath another jacket.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how that has come about over the years.
Basically,
Really.
you like it.
Yeah.
So, and also the matchbook, like I say, we've both had a little look at it, and it's so neat, so eloquent and stuff. And basically, what kind of start was that? Just something when you first went to the company? I thought, I'm going to do that.
It's funny because that, in a way, I mean, I mentioned earlier when I first started out at Carlisle, I would just do notes on a piece of paper, and I've never kept them. And to my regret, I never kept those notes of the Carlisle games. But what I did keep was a scrapbook. So I've got scrapbooks from Carlisle United with all the newspaper cut. Every game I cut out the newspaper report, kept all my press passes, the tables and everything. So I kept meticulous scrapbooks of Carlisle through the seasons I covered them, and then started using a notebook. And in the notebook started actually keeping the matches as in note form, and that sort of just stated into the format I tend to use now. But again, still quite clumsy because sometimes I would type out the notes on the computer and print it out and stick it in the book, and that's what I did at Newcastle for many years. But then I started doing the handwritten notes, and it's gradually, over the years, has developed, morphed into what it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the matchbook is sort of anti-digital perfection. It's personally, it's something that I mean, I used to make I was at university, I'd do match reports and things, and just I couldn't get anywhere near.
Well, it's become a sort of source of pride for me because I actually got my own pride in doing it now, and I like to keep it to a certain
it's a type
standard.
Of thing
but it's also an archive for me. I actually it's a useful reference, if you like, to go back to, and when I'm doing notes
for sale as well, haven't you? So you've
we had them done as a match box, which wasn't. I was pleased they did it, but it wasn't what I'd really like. It'd be published in book form.
Yeah, you should probably write a
and
book
that's what we're
your
thinking.
Matches,
and
not that I'm telling you what to do, but get it done.
No, my partner Joanne and I've often talked about how we're going to do it and how it would be a good way of doing it, and I want to do it. I'd love to do it. I mean, so many people have come up and said it would make a really good coffee table book, or and I'd like to do that. I mean, and we often thought about. Do you take the best games over a period of years, or do you just take one season? I mean, ideally, if last season they'd won the Checker Trade Trophy and gone up, would have been a perfect
it's a good start
to do, wouldn't it? But because it finished so dismally and miserably,
you could do it and say it's the book form of something. Really.
I think you could do it. I mean, I think you do a sort of a simulation of a selection of games from that season, selection of games from this season. And then, of course, there are games in the Premier. But what I did start doing was hand drawing the crests, foolishly, because
Now you've got to do it for
I've got to do it for every single game, and I didn't. You start doing these things, and you think, all right, I've got to do this for every game now. But because I used to sort of just photocopy the crest, cut it out, and stick it in the book,
which is what I would have done.
which was the easy solution and the simple solution, and would have saved me hours of time. But then I did one drawing of a crest, and then that, like you say, once you've done one, you can't stop. You becomes beholden to do every single one. At least when you've done the one, you know that you can photocopy that one from then on.
Yeah.
So
Just in case
League
you can't be bothered.
League One this season has not been as tortuous as it was last season, because
Yeah,
I've been
because
able
you
to
had a few.
photocopy a lot of last season's crests. But yeah, but again, it becomes a sense of pride again that the whole page is hand drawn,
And on average, how
handwritten.
long do they take? Like, is it Monday to Friday?
I usually set aside a morning at work
Yeah.
to do the template, to do the crest if I need to do the crest, and then later in the maybe the following morning I might fill in the team from the previous game for the opposition and so on. But I mean, overall, it's probably, I'd say, as an average, it's probably 5 to 6 hours work for each game.
It's a thing of beauty.
So,
it
but
is,
but that can.
literally
I mean, sometimes, like say, if I drew the Coventry City crest, the Lincoln City crest, or something like that alone could take an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So and then add on the rest of it. So
You've had to rip many pages out. Like
no,
a
I've
couple of
never had.
errors?
I've
No.
never had to rip a page out.
That's a
there we
feat
go.
in
I'm
itself.
terrified. I'm always terrified of being in a stand where there's no protection and it being rained on and completely ruined.
Yeah.
Or as happened at Southampton, Benno gave me a Balti pie, which half of it found its way onto the page. So now there's this
Cheers, Benno.
lovely yellow stain across the page.
It's part of.
But
the
it's part
art.
and parcel of it. Yeah,
It's
that
just-
was what happened on the day.
So you
after all,
remember that because you look at it. And you go, that's when that
it's a working notebook. It is a working notebook. That's what it is essentially.
It's my favourite thing about you.
So-
No offence, of course.
I'm
I
just
should walk
more
around
on
like
the couch.
I should walk around like this fancy dress, wearing a notebook around me. Right? Just-
Halloween
Yeah.
idea, isn't it?
get Tweed to get Harris Tweed to write some of your notebook. into
Well,
some
I mean, the
jackets.
beauty is now I discovered that Lectern, the company, the notebook company, do these notebooks slightly bigger than A4, so they're absolutely perfect for team sheets.
Yeah.
Apart from, I mean, there are obviously clubs now that do the small A5 team sheets.
Yes,
But
they
if you have most teams do an A4 team sheet, and before when you used the notebook, they always used to slightly overlap the page, and that was it. That irritated me. That was really
just
annoying.
little-
That was just
little floppy
annoying,
bits, yeah.
But now the Lecterns are great because you can fit the whole team sheet in snugly.
Does
You've got your
anybody
name on it as well? It's lovely.
Yeah.
does anybody else do that sort of thing?
Well,
Does anyone
it's
else
strange
use
because I know a
these?
couple of commentators who do keep copious notebooks, but
Nothing as beautiful as yours.
well. To me, some of them are. There's one of the Sky commentators. Is it Alistair Mann? Anyway, he. I mean, I don't know how he reads his notes because his handwriting is so small. It's incredible how much information he gets on a page and is able to read it. Now my eyesight's deteriorating. I have to have it about sort of 20 font, because it's the only way I can read it. But his is in like 1 font is 1 and it's so small. But to me, it's a thing of beauty. I look at his notes and when I see him, I think, wow. I said, how do you? I always look at your notes and how do you read these? And it must take you hours to do them, And so every commentator has their own way of setting up. I mean, I set my notes up so they're practical for me during the game as well. So I've got a work of, I've got a reference on the left, the previous opposition team, and the notes, the biographies of the players, and the right-hand page I've got where I write my notes for the day's game. So it works.
Yeah, when I was looking through it, I did see some of your frustrating points.
Oh,
where
I mean, as much as you try and keep the match day notes neat, that sometimes it's just a scrawl and
you can see how,
dashes across the line.
you can see how fuming you are.
Yeah, because you're
sometimes
trying to
with
write
penalty,
at the same time as
exclamation mark.
commentate, and sometimes you're trying to get quite a lot of detail down in what's just happened, so you remember it later. And so that can be a bit annoying.
So obviously, since you started with Sunderland, you've been with Gary Bennett, Sunderland legend. We mentioned it before. He does tend to get excited in games. Has he ever give you a really funny moment or a moment when you just went, "Oh, for God's sake"?
There's been plenty of those, and I'm trying to think what would have been one of the. There was one. I always remember someone was joking about it at work recently because you know how all the rubbish swirls around on the pitch of the Stadium of Light.
yeah.
That's our famous
I
point.
once was referring to that, and I said it's like a vortex, and there's a silence, and Benno goes, "Yeah, it's like things going round and round in a circle."
Bless him.
And so I picked up on that at work, and forever. I don't know. I've never dared mention it to Benno actually because I didn't want to offend him.
It is nice to have someone so absorbed in the club because you can tell he still loves.
Oh,
the club,
he lives and breathes it for all his frustrations, and I know people's chalk and cheese in a lot of ways. One thing about Benno is he lives and breathes every game.
Yeah,
he's got a brilliant intuition when it comes to reading a football match. He will, if you listen, he will instinctively second guess a manager when a substitution should be made, or he will be saying you should be making a substitution now, or he will do this, and he would invariably gets the substitutions absolutely spot on. He can read a game. He's a very good coach, actually.
He's always there. Work with the youths.
Yeah, he works with he works with a couple of university teams now and a ladies team, and his ladies team's just about to win their league again. His university team's just won a cup last week and is invariably,
So it goes to show there's something there.
And when he was Darlington coach, his record was good actually, and it all ended there for whatever reason. But he actually was doing well with Darlington. He's a very good coach and a very good reader of the game.
Yeah.
So he's very good to have alongside you in that situation. And at times I wish he'd talk a bit more.
Instead of just screaming.
give us the benefit of that brilliance, but when he does, he's spot on.
But like you say, he's so absorbed, and for all of his frustrations, I don't think BBC Newcastle match days would be the same.
Well, he got the cough thing is funny because I had a bad cough recently, and it nagged at me away the virus for a month or so, and it was quite bad. And I was coughing.
starting it, weren't you?
I know, I was probably as the initiator of this whole worldwide
I was in
pandemic.
Wuhan in November.
So I would cough during a game, and poor old Benno was getting everyone crucifying him for coughing, and it wasn't. It was me, and it was all on the basis that it couldn't possibly be me because I was commentating, but in fact it was. And so recently at Portsmouth, he'd had it. That was it. He'd had enough. Because someone came on and mentioned it. And he said, "It's not me! It's not me!"
Bless him. I will say, he did give me last season one of my favourite moments supporting Sunderland. I was ill for the Portsmouth game at home when we drew 1-1. And my dad was like, "Oh, do you want to bet on?" I went, "I'll have Ozturk first goal." And we scored for about 10th minute or something. And he went, "It's a goal." And he went, "Ozturk." And he just went, "It's Tom Flanagan." And I was like,
We had a...
yeah.
We've had the moment like that before. We were at Hull a few years back. And it was... what's the lad who went to... Connor Wickham. I was sure Connor Wickham had scored. I was absolutely positive. But as soon as I said Connor Wickham, Benno went, "Whoever." I thought, well, hang on a minute, start self-doubting then. And he's going, "Yeah," well, and he kept on about how it was. And I said, "Are you sure?" Yeah, absolutely nailed on, carried on for about a minute. And then the stadium announcer came out and they go, "Connor Wickham." And I said, why don't I just trust my judgment? I'm sure it's Connor Wickham. Gone with Connor Wickham. But he managed to convince me it wasn't. And then the stadium announcer, "Connor Wickham."
It's like when the players down in, you have Cope, so is that 09?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Like
That's one of the you listen back through commentaries, and we have had long conversations going back basically through the whole team before we actually realise we've been wrong
because it's
from
so
the start.
high up now as well.
The stadium light's impossible. It's a horrible position to commentate from now because you are too far away from it. You do have to rely on little things like colour of boots, even the way that a player, their stance, the way they hold themselves. To really try and nail. If there's a bundle in the penalty area, you forget it.
Yeah,
because you just haven't got a prayer that high.
It's 1 of 7.
It's just a horrible height.
I don't
to try
understand
and
why
pick
they did
things
that.
out.
I really don't.
I know the reasons why, but it's not a great working environment.
Wasn't Martin O'Neill wanted to move them as well?
No, it wasn't. I mean, it was literally to do with. I mean, there were a couple of reasons. I mean, one was that where we used to be in the paddock, which was a brilliant position. They're expensive seats. They're seats that the club could sell, and make quite a lot of money on, and they are having to expand the press spots because UEFA rules meant you had to have X number of seats. And here's all the press sitting them for free. That they're not making any income from them, so they therefore move the press. But you think, well, be logical about this. Move them somewhere which is still a practical position. But no, you can't sell the seats at the top of the West Stand. That's a good place to put you. So that's. I mean, I remember Aston Villa did the same. Aston Villa moved the press box. We used to be at the back of the old stand. It was horrible. It was quite high up in the back. The roof dripped and leaked, and it wasn't a great position. So what they did was move the press into the middle of the stand, the main stand, when they rebuilt the stand. Brilliant. It was the best press box we'd ever been in. Perfect facilities. And then they realised, of course, actually, we could sell the seats there and they moved the press box to the left, and we're down, at Villa now you're down one end by the tunnel. So clubs do it for they don't build press boxes for altruistic reasons. Yeah. Manchester United's got an awful press box, as has Everton. And
there's always the pillar, isn't there? Always hear that on there.
There's a pillar in the way. There's no room for you to sit. You're cramped in this really tiny sort of aisle, with barely anywhere to put your equipment or anything. And Old Trafford is not much different. They've squeezed everybody in. They've expanded it a little bit in the last couple of years, but again,
it's like built on Lego anyway.
It's almost like the Man United are making 800 and something billion a year or whatever, but won't allow a bigger press box and a better working environment. Yeah. You go to some of the others, and you go to Arsenal, and I've not been to the new Tottenham one, but I'm told it's very good.
I'd love to go.
You go to those. I don't think I'm ever going to get to Tottenham in my lifetime now.
Don't say things like that.
But you go to
the cup.
Well, Arsenal was a funny one because the Emirates, the girl who used to be the press officer there, Amanda, she's not there now, but when they built the stadium, they came to her and said, well, what do you want from a media perspective at the Emirates? So she thought, well, I'll play this a bit canny. If I ask for everything I could possibly want, I might get half of it. She got the lot.
Oh, wow.
They didn't balk on anything.
No scrimp.
So they've got a fantastic press box, an enormous media room, and off the media room there's a small post-match theatre which holds I don't know how many people. Then you go out into a corridor where there's 7 or 8 television rooms, and then the tunnel and everything else. I mean, it's incredible.
It always reminds me of a business park every time you go past on King's Cross, because you see
it's
like a football stadium.
I mean, it's an amazing stadium, although now even the Emirates, in a way, it starts to feel a bit dated, because the new Tottenham Stadium and Wembley and
how old's the Emirates now? About 20-year-old?
Yeah, you might be right. I'm trying to think. It would be, wouldn't it?
It was getting built when we went down with the 19 points, because I think it was now.
You're getting on 17, 18 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
And now you look at it now, and you realise how small Highbury was when you see Highbury.
It's just a street.
I remember when it was being built, you'd be sitting in Highbury, and there's this enormous, like, great spaceship looming out of the Holloway, and it's extraordinary. But that starts to, as football's moved. But again, I always find every time I've been to the Emirates, I don't think the atmosphere is great there. I never felt it's been a good atmosphere.
Because everyone's sat
and
down
I don't think it's a good atmosphere at Old Trafford. It's very rare that we've been there.
The best atmospheres are when you're uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at ROKER Park, no one was ever comfortable.
I used to love. I mean, I like Craven Cottage, and I used to love Highbury and those old
even
grounds.
the old Stamford Bridge. When Stamford Bridge
there was a bit more. Even Goodison, for all the deficiencies of the press box, I like Goodison Park as a stadium.
Villa Park as well. It used to be.
Villa's a great. There's a good atmosphere there. So, but the days of fine dining at Stamford Bridge and the Emirates are now over. It's now pot noodles at Accrington Stanley and pie vouchers at Rotherham. It's
there's some all right League Ones, but there is some bad ones.
I've got nothing against League One games. I actually really enjoy. I mean, the flip side of it's been, it's horrible that Sunderland are where they are, but there is I've really enjoyed covering football again in League One. I mean, it reminded me all the years I was at Carlisle. There's a real camaraderie at clubs, and clubs can't go. They go out of their way to be friendly, and there's no media circus there. They they are painfully aware of their deficiencies in terms of facilities, and so they bend over backwards to accommodate you and try and make things work for you. I mean, Accrington Stanley is an example. There's a woman there. She writes the programme. She has to deal with the referees. She has to deal with the press. She has to deal with all the football secretary duties. And yet, every time we've been there, can I get you a cup of tea? Have you got everything you want? Is everything in the press box all right? Can I get you team? When do you want to speak to the referee? And bending over backwards to make it work. To make it work. The young lad at Fleetwood, he was on work experience basically.
It's not Joey Barton, is
But
it?
no, it was funny. I mean, for all the joke, but we arrived at Fleetwood, and you go around the back, and you go in a little office at the back of the stand, and it's like a few sandwiches laid out, cans of Coke underneath the desk, and a little laptop open, and the press passes bundled in next to the sandwiches or whatever. And there's this young lad of 20 in his suit, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm on a year's secondment from Salford University or something. It's work experience. I'm the press officer this season. And so what can I get you? What can I do for you? And can I get you a coffee?" Yeah. Off he goes, finds a kettle and comes back. But again, really wanted everything. He just want. And the funny thing is, we go up to the press box, and he said, "Oh, it's gonna be really busy tonight. We work today. We've even got the Sunday Sun here." And he thought the Sunday Sun was the national Sunday Sun.
News
Of
of
course,
the world.
it's not. It's the Northeast Sunday Sun and sort of thing. He thought, "Yeah, we've got the Sunday Sun here." He was really excited. But there is this sort of you go most places and they do. Scunthorpe's maybe a bit of an exception, but it's strange. But it on the whole, everywhere you go, they realise they haven't got. The funniest was when we were at Port Vale last year in the Cup. We arrived there, and I think Benno found the first few months of the season a bit challenging because he's used to going into Premier League or Championship press rooms, and there's food and TVs, and he can watch the match before, and then all of a sudden you get to Glanford Park, and there's not even a press room, so the chance of any sort of relative comfort is gone. So we get to Port Vale, and the press officer there, again, someone who doubles up as doing everything. Benno said to him, "Oh, where's the press room?" And going, looked a bit puzzled. He went back through the double doors. It's over the fork, over the concourse, back through the double doors. Benno disappears through these double doors, and in a minute he comes back with this look of horror on his face. And I said, he goes to the press office and says, "Where did you say it was?" The guy, "Yeah, through the double doors." And so he vanishes, and a couple of minutes later I go out, and he's stood in the middle of the concourse looking like he's just seen a ghost. And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And he said, "Have you seen the press room?" I said, "Well, no, because you were going to find." He said, "It's that room." And you look across and you go in, and it's basically the caretaker's cupboard with a tea urn. And it was just he was in shock and horror at this sort of this is as low as it could possibly get for him. And I thought, Christ, honestly, we're only a couple of months into the season. This is, where are we going to go with this?
I bet he'd kill for it for Saturday.
Honestly, so yeah, and I think, and the funny thing was, at the end of the season, I think there was a real part of him. I sensed that he wasn't going to. I think he sort of hinted that he was going to pick and choose his games this year. But I think then when I said, okay, which games do you not want to do? Because I'll ask Danny Collins or Stephen Elliott to do them. I think it thought, hang on a minute, don't want someone else taking my place, sort of thing. And he hasn't missed a game. So now, if they don't go up next season, this season, that'd be another challenge.
Can't deal with a cold.
I'm not, he can deal with that now because he's got a rug. He bought me one, actually. And he wraps himself up in it. He looks like some banshee, He's wrapped in his rug and his, in his coat and everything. And so he makes sure he's warm.
Proper hero.
I can guarantee though, at the end of the season, he'll go, "Right, we'll come back." I did that at the end of the last season. On the train back, absolutely devastated, saying, "I'm not going back anymore." I've missed 2 games this season.
It was funny because I think so many fans I spoke to said, "I'm not renewing my season card." In fact, they got more, didn't they? The number went up. I think it's this old.
We can't help it, can we?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think if you're a true football fan, you can't help yourself. It's you. And I think it's interesting now because of this break, how it's almost like a national disaster. Yeah. Not the pandemic, the lack of
football. Yeah,
lack of a game. I mean, we felt it. We went. I mean, how desperate are things come? We went to IKEA on Saturday.
Oh no!
And we were joking that is this what normal people do on a weekend? I mean, these people, and these are all normal people. They come to IKEA, and
did anyone panic by any?
No, it was just really straight. I mean, funny enough, it was quieter than the normal because but it was a weird feeling, and then you appreciate then that there are thousands of people for whom it is an absolute ritual going to the game on a Saturday, not just the match, the build up, everything they do, whether it be getting on the bus, meeting Bob, going for a pint, going for a pie. And that is it, and it's in a strange way. football fans are institutionalized.
Yeah.
The result doesn't matter half the time, does it?
No,
Just-
it's part of the ritual of going. And I had this long conversation again. I was going back to. I'm referring back to this interview about Carlisle, but we were talking about why this day at Wembley was so big for Carlisle United, and I equated it in a way to the Man City League Cup final. It wasn't so much about the result, because I think we all in our back of our minds and hearts knew that we weren't going to beat Manchester City.
Yeah.
You know, you have this hope.
We did win 1-0
when
to
Fabio,
the
when we
half-time.
went one up, you're thinking, right, okay, maybe this is the. But you almost went thinking this is more about the day out and the occasion, and that was the same with Carlisle in '95, and it came round to the fact of what it meant was that for that season, because Carlisle won promotion, they won the championship and 4th Division championship. They lost the final of the trophy, the Autoglass as it was then, on the Golden Goal, and there were 77,000 at Wembley, and it was a fantastic day out. But it proved to everybody in Carlisle that it was a community thing.
Yeah.
The whole city came out. The whole, virtually that was the population of Carlisle turned up at Wembley that day, and the camaraderie of that was something you can't put your finger on. And that is why I think this pandemic now and what it's doing is so devastating, because what football gives everybody is this national camaraderie. You know, whether it's, and it's slightly been diluted a little bit over the last few decades, because games kick off at stupid times all over the weekend, and that has diluted what was fundamentally this fantastic 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
And there'll be lots of
Put the
people.
pools on.
I'm old enough, to remember you'd get home and put the final score on and the video printer and all those things.
Teletext.
Everything, because it was a part and parcel of the day, you know. And I went to games and at Exeter, and you come back from the pouring rain, soaked through, and they'd lost 3-0. Didn't matter.
Yeah, the best line I've ever heard is, "Why let the football ruin a weekend of football?"
And up here, especially, it's a big talking point. I mean, I can only think the only place I could equate it, 2 places I could equate it with are Glasgow and Liverpool. That it's the only place you can think of where people will talk football all week.
Yeah,
and really look forward to the.
Oh, it's the entire region as well, though. I mean,
and it's not just Newcastle, not just Sunderland. It's because it's ingrained. It's in the blood. It's sort of a generational thing that gets passed on. I think it's great. I think it's great that kids. I love it when I see these stories about parents taking their son or daughter to the game for the first time, and because that's so important. It's just so important, because ultimately they're the ones that are gonna get the bug and keep going and keep it going.
No, mine didn't. Mine hated it. It was too cold.
When you took them to the box.
Yeah, we went to the box. They're both I've got autistic twin boys. And we went to a box. It's like a box for autistic children.
Oh yes, yeah,
it's
the
greatest experience I've ever had.
Yeah,
because I could get warm if I wanted to and watch the match on the telly.
The Shippies, they've done a fantastic job with that.
Yeah,
I mean, that is another thing. Look, that's another thing about Sunderland that just
you're bringing all of the community
I'm going to blow a
together.
few people's trumpets here. The Shippy campaign with all that. Joanne next to me, Joanne Youngston, and the BLC and the Mind, the mental health hub at the club on a Saturday, which is now getting national attention. Yeah. Now,
as it should.
For all the, people can knock Sunderland, those campaign that for autism and the mental health, those things alone, to start those in Sunderland is absolutely fantastic.
I think
it's easy to knock football sometimes, but sometimes it can come out with some, brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, the lad who's doing that is he's trying to get it into every football stadium in the country. He's currently got it in 14, so a box in 14 different stadiums for autistic people alone is pretty cool.
Yeah,
and it's a full century box.
I remember the pride when they got it into Watford and wherever else to start with, and other clubs started looking at it and doing it, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And that again, that's come out from football people wanting everybody to enjoy it.
And as it should be, it's a game there for everybody to enjoy. It shouldn't just be
for all the things that are wrong, and there's so many things that are wrong with the game and crowds. Sometimes there's a lot of good, and that tends sometimes to get swallowed up in.
It gets
in
forgotten by the result, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Exactly.
Sorry, I was just going to ask Nick what he's been doing to sort of fill the void.
Well, luckily, I had actually taken leave this week because it would have been Bury at the weekend. I thought, well, this is a good time to use up
take leave anyway.
So I took leave. And heaven knows what I'm going to do next week when I go back to work. But I think, like everybody, I've got to go back in and quite, I'm being practical. We're looking at the next 3 months is not going to have any football. I'm going to have to, I think, rejig my leave for the summer, because my gut feeling is that we will probably get football again in June, July, maybe July, August. And so therefore I'll just take my leave earlier. And what we do with the days I haven't got leave, we try and fill airtime.
Personally, Joanne's got some rooms that he's doing around the house, some shelves that he's putting up.
I'm no good at DIY. I'll put it straight.
It's only been a fortnight, and I've brought myself down to watching other people play football on the computer. That's how bad it's getting for me.
It would be very interesting, but I just hope it doesn't. I mean, there's a school of thought that when it comes back, everyone will be so excited because we haven't had any sport that will get a spike in crowds.
Yeah,
I just hope it doesn't last so long that people actually start finding other things to do, which become routine. Because I know in the past, when Sunderland relegated in 2003, I had friends who were season ticket holders then, who stopped going, and they basically said, we found other things to do on Saturday afternoons, and we don't miss not going. Yeah, because they were fed up with all the losing, and
it was awful.
So there's a danger that a prolonged absence or a prolonged spell without sport, and people will find other things to do on a Saturday afternoon and then decide, actually, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now, and
quite enjoy darts in the pub.
Which is, I mean, I don't think it'll be as marked here, because I think the fan base at Sunderland is too strong, and the position Sunderland are in at the minute. But I can see it happening in other clubs.
Yeah, like sort of like the rugby towns and things.
Yeah,
like
I mean, Norwich cities of this world, or no disrespect to Norwich, but you get a feeling when you go to Norwich, the crowd dynamic is completely different to.
Yeah, I mean, they've always been the nicest fans when they come up here.
You can get a sense of that at some clubs, and as I say, I think the fan base is too strong up here, but I think there's a danger nationwide that there could be aspects of that. In other places,
they'll have to do something to try and keep in interest.
Definitely, and it's like you said, it's like when we were on about like going to IKEA and stuff. My Saturday was just horrible. It was just, it's like pre-season when there's no Euros or World Cup on. It's just nothing.
Just waiting for football is just rubbish friendly.
And I mean, my girlfriend's trying to say, "Oh, do you want to go for a walk wherever?" Lovely place. We went to Alnwick actually. Lovely place, Alnwick. Got to 3 o'clock. And like, what the fuck you scores?
I should be putting me 600,000 to one accumulator on. You know what I mean?
It's a bet on.
I mean, weird wasn't that racing was going on with no crowds because of the betting side of it, and
even that's stopped.
That's gone now, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's for the greater good, and we hope it's all sorted out.
I mean, look, this is a once in a lifetime happening. We hope.
Yeah.
I mean,
better be.
Well, it's like all these references back to the Second World War, and that that there's a generation obviously that grew up in that, and who now are coping with this in a completely different way to the way we are, because we never experienced the hardship of the Second World War, and it's undoubtedly, I suspect, it would be true to say that it was harder and the hardships were greater then than they are now for us.
Indeed, yeah.
The sacrifices we're making at the moment are nothing, I think, as compared to the sacrifices. So you can understand why older people are so stoical about this. I speak to my mother, and she's what was her phrase today? I think it's all a bit over the top. I thought, no, hang on a minute, let's just put it in perspective. But I do think there is that element to it now. But I do think, this is so exceptional. I mean, I've never encountered anything.
No, it's a scary time, isn't
like
it?
this in my life, and it's
the fact that the whole country has to shut down.
Just the shutdown aspect of it all, and you can be living you can be at home and you can be doing normal things, and then you put the telly on, and suddenly it says, well, 40 tube stations are shut now, and then an hour later you put it on, or a day later you put it on again. Oh, now you can't do this or you can't do that.
It's like today I've had a relatively normal day, apart from when I went shopping. So you go shopping.
You're suddenly thrown into unusual situations. And, I went to the supermarket, and then it hits you that all the shelves are empty.
And yet the
car park was full, and there seemed to be total normality until you get in the shop.
It was madness. I couldn't believe it.
I mean, I was in Edinburgh yesterday, and it was weird. It was a ghost town.
Yeah.
And probably, ironically, the safest place to be because there was nobody around. Yeah. And yet, you're on a train with 6 people. there were more staff at Newcastle station than there were passengers, but all the trains are running as normal, everything's running as normal, and yet you're sitting in a totally abnormal situation. And you sit there trying to get then the guards coming on the train, or train manager I should say, on the way back, encouraging people not to go on the train, actually imploring you not to get trains, and yet treating you totally normally on the train as though nothing's wrong, normal service, and welcome you back on board. And you think it was just really weird. It's such a really surreal experience.
My job outside of this ridiculously lucrative job is I'm a bus driver, literally just down the road, and I deal with the elderly every day. And I mean,
so but you have to carry on totally normally, contact with people every day, driving the bus on
no drop of service,
normal service. I just find I mean, I just think there's some very conflicting. We are getting political now, aren't we? I mean, I just thought, sense this morning, there was a very conflicting messages sometimes, like the government's coming out with, we don't want you travelling on public transport in London, but we're not shutting London
we're not
down,
going to close it.
And you're more than happy to travel.
That's probably because it's mostly private ran as opposed to.
So what are you saying? Are you? What is the message there? If you really are concerned about travelling on public transport, then you shouldn't be telling people that, you know, yes, we're not shutting London down and you can travel normally.
Yeah, so it's like they've told everybody over 70 to remain in the homes for 12 weeks. Yet today we've just allowed over 70s to travel whenever they want at any time, which is a really good thing for them, because
I've seen more elderly people out than anybody.
They're the only people travelling at the moment.
Think, this is weird. Someone's going to write an amazing novel at some point when it's all over.
It's going to sell well.
There's going to be a dystopian novel that's going to be an absolute bestseller because it's got all the ingredients.
That's all I've read about 6 years prior to now is post-apocalyptic novels, and I'm terrified of everything now. As soon as I read this,
I mean, there is this talk, isn't it, about you can over-egg things and actually put fear into people's minds about the situation when there's not probably any. There may be justifiable reasons for you to be afraid, but if you over-egg it, you actually encourage people to do the opposite of what you want them to do.
Yeah.
So that you've got to walk this fine line. So I do understand it's difficult, and because really we're totally in the dark, because we've just got no idea how it's going to.
Let's just bring back football. Everything will be fine.
At least in this winter break, I've just called. At least in this break, on this enforced break, on April the 1st, we have Sunderland Till I Die season 2 coming on.
Well, I tell you what, it couldn't have come out at a better time, could it? You know, they pitched it well. I wouldn't be surprised they're behind the whole thing because they knew they'd get more viewers. Yeah. But I mean, you know, the whole thing about sport, though. I mean, you know, stop mass gatherings, stop people. You know, football was one prime example where you could see, yes, there was sense in stopping it, because, like the other weekend, we had how many hundreds travelled up from Kent to Sunderland and how many travelled from Newcastle to Southampton. Now, there's a surefire way to spread, you know, a virus. Well, okay, how do you go over that, get away with that? You have the away fan ban. Yeah, it's unfair, but it was practical because you are containing everybody in your specific areas. But none of that was ever mentioned. It was a sort of panic reaction. And you know that as soon as one body makes a decision, that all the others are going to have to toe the line. They've got to do it. So,
will you be watching Sunderland Till I Die too?
Yeah,
because
I will. Apparently, I'm told the quote, "My gob's all over it."
Oh, champion!
So, I'll be fascinated to see, because the two series I think will be very different, because the two directors worked in very different ways.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see Methven and Donald work.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's clearly going to be about it's going to be heavily about them, because they're the characters they are.
It's less episodes as well.
And and it's been done. I think Richard who directed this, produced this series, was very mindful of the continuity issues in the last series, and it's very chronological from what I've been told. So, you know, you got episodes 1 and 2, then I think 3 or 4. One of those 2 is the Wembley checker trade.
Yeah, that's the one I don't watch.
To, the season panning out, but in a chronological order, and hopefully the continuity is much more organised, and they've sort of not made those same errors again. Richard was very methodical in the way he directed and produced it. Suits, who did the last series, was much more throw the cards in the air, let's see where they land, and watch the relationships, and much more, I think, character driven in the sense that I think he had a very good relationship with the players, and
especially the players who weren't even here when it was released. It was
so I think the dynamic was very different, and it will be a very different series. But again, I think it'll be fascinating because of what people will see that went on behind the scenes. It's this strange situation with the last series that everyone was watching the championship season pan out and go horribly wrong, and it's condemnation of this or condemnation of that, and then a year later you watch Sunderland Till I Die. I think, oh really? Was that what? Yeah. So that was what was going on. Oh, I didn't realise that was going on, which is a shame in a way that couldn't run concurrently, so you could have a better perspective. Going back to what you were saying earlier about how you are opinion formers, if you like, and if that run concurrently as a fly on the wall documentary going out the week after a game or whatever, and I think then the perception of what was going on or what is going on at the football club would have been completely different. But because it's
football,
because it's football and it's taken a year and a half to edit and put together, and now it comes out, it all seems such a dim and distant memory. But I think at the same time it would be quite illuminating.
The only issue I've got with it, and I've mentioned this on a pod recently, is what's happening at the end. It's like watching like a really good action film, knowing that the hero's going to die at the end.
Yeah,
I just don't. I think I will watch because it has come in this break, and it's going to be watching.
I just want to have a little cry. It's like watching Marley and Me again, isn't it?
Exactly that.
Look, it'd be fascinating because we're all. We all basically want to see it because it's Sunderland, and you want to know how it's portrayed, the club's portrayed, people are portrayed, and you want it to be. You don't want it to give you want it to give a good impression of the. I think for all the, the things that went horribly wrong in the first series, people loved it. People I talked to from across the country,
even like loads of not Sunderland fans,
loved
loads
it.
of people,
football fans, everybody.
Didn't it?
Yeah, I mean all my fellow commentators, reporters I saw around the country, thought it was fantastic.
No, it was.
I was at Bristol. It was. I mean, I was at Bristol the other week, and the Richard from Radio Bristol then said, "Oh, is this second series coming out?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, that first series was fantastic. It was fantastic."
That's good to
well,
hear.
we see because they look forward to it in a completely different. Their relationship with it is completely different to ours. Because what they're watching is this club in crisis that's falling apart, and thinking, "My God, thank God that could be us," and they're looking in from the outside. We're looking out from the inside. So, our relationship with the two series is completely different from everyone else globally and nationally.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
Trending #1 on Netflix the first week it comes out, won't it?
I mean, in an odd masochistic way, I'm quite looking forward to it, just to see the Wembley again. I mean, although the results were appalling, the weekends, it's just the people.
Yeah, if they've done a good thing on that, obviously on the Trafalgar Square and stuff, that it will shed us in a lovely light and stuff. It's just like I said,
but the football drama, you couldn't make it up, could you?
No.
Last second at the playoff final, you lose to Charlton, who'd beaten you, 99. It's just it's almost so contrived.
It's poetic.
You could sit down and say, this was made up by the producers.
Yeah, definitely.
If the producers had come to you at the beginning of the season and say, right, this is what we're going to do, you'd look at them and go, you are absolutely bonkers. There's no way that is going to happen. Sure enough, it happens because that's Sunderland.
Kind of in our film, the hero dies halfway through. I know Josh Madger didn't die, but if it was a Hollywood film, the hero would die halfway through.
He was sent away on a boat somewhere. Poor
but you couldn't make it up. Josh Madger, Will Grigg, Charlton. All the ingredients.
The narrative's there, isn't it?
Yeah. And so, if you can't make a good documentary out of that, then you don't deserve to be documentary makers, basically.
Yeah, so that is out on April the 1st, just for anyone who would like to watch it.
Yeah.
Like I say, I will end up watching it, I know for a fact I will, and cry all over again.
It'll kill a day sometime, won't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So, someone at work joked it should be called Sunderland Till It Kills You.
Yeah. No, it slowly is, isn't it?
It's not wrong, yeah.
It slowly is. We're just living this life where Sunderland will eventually.
It is the hope that kills you, isn't it?
Yeah. So we'll wrap it up a little bit now because we have been talking for nearly 2 hours, I think. So we're cracking on. So I do want to ask Nick one last question regarding your commentary, your greatest moments following Sunderland.
One of my worst moments.
I'll do best and worst if you want.
I'll do best and worst only because we were talking about the Carlos Edward goal against Burnley earlier. At that moment, we lost our line at the Stadium Light. As I'm watching Carlos Edwards smash in this unbelievable goal against Burnley, our line went down and we couldn't get it back. So it was like I was just like God, this is the worst thing that can possibly happen to you as a commentator. But best moment, I mean, look, you go back over games. I look the League Cup semi-final win at Old Trafford.
Yeah,
that night was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. The League Cup final, to go to Wembley in a senior final with Sunderland was brilliant. I mean, the result was disappointing, but to actually go there, the Derby games, that run of Derby games, those wins. I mean, the Paolo Di Canio one, the Defoe goal, all those were incredible. Yeah. And I actually hate the build up to the Derby. It's a week I really hate it, and I really want to get the game done, dusted over, move on. But those, because of the result, because I think what you fear is losing, so you don't want to. You don't want to be.
That must be a commentator thing, because we had Simon Crabtree on and he said exactly the same thing. He hated the build-up.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Love the game, hate the build-up.
Yeah, and you just want to get it out of the way. And
I hate the whole day. I hate Derby Day altogether.
Yeah,
I mean, I love to be there and everything, but no,
it's just... and it's a sort of weird, isn't it? Because the one fixture, as soon as they come out, you look for, and all the heightened build-up for the season is about that fixture. But from professional working point of view, I hate it.
I don't think it's going to happen for a while.
But no, it's strange, isn't it, how these things pan out? But those wins were, remarkable, to be honest.
Yeah. The states we were in.
Yeah, and there've been moments in. I mean, that I actually, looking back, that 3-0 win at Stamford Bridge under Steve Bruce.
Yeah.
And albeit Chelsea, probably weren't the best team. It wasn't the best Chelsea team in the world at that time, but they still had a remarkable home record.
And then Nader Manua danced through the defence.
And to go through there and not concede a goal. And I just felt for the poor... There were a lot of Sunderland fans who decided not to go that day because of the ticket prices at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah.
And just felt, that's it, had enough, not going. And it brought up this whole dilemma of, you'll go and watch the team wherever, whatever, however much it costs, because it's your team.
Yeah.
And you'd go in the fear that the one day you don't go will be the day that you miss something.
And that was it.
That was the moment.
Yeah.
I thought, those supporters, they'll be kicking themselves. It'll be killing them, because it'd be the one day they decided not to go when it happened.
Yeah.
And that was such a big win.
It was the greatest performance I think I've ever seen us have in the past 20 years anyway. That Chelsea performance was
I mean, as you say, the manner of it. And
it didn't stand a chance, Chelsea. It was such a strange thing.
And the
really
greatest
weird
goal celebration.
Oh, yeah, the Bolo's Enders.
Yeah.
Not Asamoah Gyan.
No,
that was Enders. Yeah.
And you go to Goodison Park and lose 7-1. You go to Chelsea and lose 7-2, and
Southampton,
and then that Paolo Di Canio game, we go to Aston Villa and Danny Rose scores, and you think, you 1-0 up, and then you go and lose 6-1.
Yeah.
What is going on here? But football, isn't it?
And very last question: what are you doing this weekend?
What am I doing this weekend? I don't know.
Football again?
I don't know. It's all up in the air at the moment, because my sister was meant to be coming from London, but I think that's
IKEA again.
Way things are going, it might be.
Yeah. The meatballs are nice in IKEA.
The dime cake.
I had them last weekend.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap that up. Also, the Sunderland Food Bank does need your help. So if you have any, leftover food, everyone's been going out buying far too much of everything. If you've got anything left over, please take that down to Sunderland Food Bank.
We know you have toilet roll.
Exactly. It doesn't even matter, toilet roll, porridge, whatever, because they're struggling, in this horrible time. They are struggling, and they do a really, really good job for the region, really. We've got a link on our website. If you just want to click on that, it'll take you to where you can do some drop-offs. Nick, thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Yeah, Joanne, obviously, thank you so much. Been sitting there on your phone for an hour and a half, bless you.
Word?
No, she doesn't want to talk. Oh, bless her.
It's like sooty and sweet.
Oh. We'll actually say I was obviously at the Fans Museum for the Fans International night. Fantastic. Brilliant night.
I was at work. Thanks for that.
It was great. So, Anth as well. What are you doing this weekend?
Work. I'm at work,
yeah.
I am driving a bus on Saturday. I'm off Sunday, but I'll be taking the kids somewhere, I'd imagine. Do something fun.
Thank you once again to Johnny Rob for
it's pandemic in this
studio here at Deptford Sound.
Deptford
He's made
Sound.
us feel right at home. We're going to order a pizza and play out some kind of game once we're finished. And also, coming from me, I am going to end with a kind of song lyrics. I think it kind of just needs to be said for everyone. In a world that is trying to lose its mind, be more kind, my friends. Try to be more kind. Thank you very much and good night.
Like a beacon reaching